I'll go ahead and get started here. But for those of you who just joined, thank you for joining. Hopefully, a lot of this information here will be helpful. But I know a lot of you all are here for a very, very similar reason. What the heck is happening? And so a lot of these questions, by the way, for those of you who put some in the chat box, I appreciate it. But there's a lot of good ones, a lot of similar ones to not a huge surprise. If you didn't have the opportunity to put any in there, if I have some time at the end, I'd love to answer additional ones live. But I've got probably about 15 or so that I'll dive into, depending on how much I talk on some of those. We'll probably have some time at the end. So this will be about a half-hour presentation, maybe a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, depending on some of these questions. But I'll dive right into it. I think the big question for a lot of people here is, what is happening? Happening from a job search, happening from just within the pharmaceutical biotech industry in the job search perspective. I've had so many conversations with you all, essentially on what the heck is happening. And so for some background context, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Nick Poloni from a small boutique firm by the name of Cascadia Search Group. We've been around for about 35 years, and we as well have noticed some trends within the industry, within hiring, just not necessarily in a good way. And so here to help you all navigate that. Myself personally, I've been around for about 7 years within this space. I've seen a lot of change, and changed in some ways in the good, some ways in the bad, but I think it's just new to a lot of people. And so without further ado, I've got a series of slides that'll kind of go over a lot of these questions that people have asked. And again, if there's any questions that people have or want me to dive a little bit deeper, please put those in the chat. What I'll do is I'll answer those at the end. And then I do have a favor in the last slide that if you guys can stick around for, I'll get into. And so I think one of the best questions, honestly, from the questions asked, which was multiple people, and that is, why don't recruiters and hiring managers acknowledge or reply to emails? If anybody knows the answer to that, tell me, because we're all sitting here with the same question. And this was a question to an extent that was mentioned probably by at least 15 or 20 people, is people think they're doing something wrong to not get a reply. And the way I look at it is hiring is not just finding the right person, but it involves vetting people. It involves getting back to people. If you post a job opening on LinkedIn or any professional network and you don't expect to get replies or reply to people, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. But I think this is a great Kickstarter question, is why don't recruiters and hiring managers acknowledge and reply to emails? The first piece that I've heard in a lot of conversations with people is this reposted deal on LinkedIn. I put a screenshot there of Karuna. Gotta love Karuna, great upcoming company in the neurospace. But you can see from these job postings where that finger's pointed, it'll say reposted, with over 150 applicants as well. And so what that means, just that reposted piece, is, and I put the quote from LinkedIn's website, is you can select to promote jobs up to 14, 21, or 30 days. And if you don't select that promotion schedule, your job goes on an auto renew. And so when you see that reposted piece in that job description 4 days ago, that means it was reposted 4 days ago. The big question mark is, how long has it really been up there? It could have been reposted 5 times over the course of 3 or 4 months, which would give you an idea of why there's 150 applicants. I can pretty much guarantee you, having been in this space for a while, there's not 150 qualified applicants. When you see the over 150 applicants, over 200, 400, 500 applicants, I always tell people ignore that, because at the end of the day, it matters. Your profile is what matters most. And so when you look at some of these jobs I've seen online, a VP of market access, 500 applicants for a US based role. There's not 500 people in the world that are qualified for that role. And so the 150 applicants, I think, is the equivalent to going into a doctor's office and saying, hey, doctor, I have, I Googled my symptoms. I have XYZ, and it's now telling me I have cancer. And the doctor's sitting there and saying, man, Google's the worst enemy right now. And that's very, very similar to this scenario here. Is the over 150 applicants, I think it's one of the worst pieces on LinkedIn, as well as the auto renew feature. Um, I think companies do it honestly just to make it look fresh, and that we haven't had a job, open for 3 months. So again, that reposted thing, I wouldn't take too much into account, other than you now know that that job's been up for a while, and the question mark is how long, but it's not 4 days. Cover letters, an interesting topic. I'm going to give you some contradicting data to what I'm seeing here, and that data from Resume Genius is that people always read them, or most of the time. Over 75% of people, most of the time, are always read them. Keep in mind that this statistic is specific to every industry and abroad. And so I think in pharma biotech specifically, which I know a lot of the audience here is part of, I don't read them. I don't know a lot of hiring managers that read them. When I work with candidates, I don't send them over. I include what I call, a lot of you have worked with me, a highlight reel, bullet points, 5 to 6 bullet points on your background, your profile, as they relate to the job or what the hiring manager is looking for. I know in a lot of cases with applications, you don't have that ability to put that there. You could, I don't know, maybe you could take away a cover letter and put a PDF in there of 5 or 6 bullet points on your profile. I wouldn't recommend it. In most cases, it's probably not getting read. Is it going to hurt you? I don't think so. If your spelling and grammar is not good, then it would hurt you. So I would say, if you're an executive, or even anywhere from a sales rep all the way up within pharma biotech, a cover letter is not worth your time. This was an interesting one. Is the yes or no when it comes to questions on an application? You see, it's a yes or no answer, and maybe the application doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not a clear yes or no. And that's one of the hard pieces right now that I'm noticing trends on within recruitment specific to pharma biotech. I don't know who's setting those answers up on the back end. It's more than likely not the hiring manager. And so what it tells me is the person that's recruiting on that role probably doesn't have a good understanding of the role, probably isn't terribly familiar with the pharma biotech space as a whole. At the end of the day, I'm ethics over everything. And that's where it's really, really difficult in a scenario like this. I saw this one, I thought long and hard about it for a day. And at the end of the day, you can't lie about something that you don't have. But then it does pull you back in the direction. It's a double-edged sword. And it's like, well, if I say no to something I have, but it's no, the way the question's asked, that's again where I would probably, if you can, try to reach out to a hiring manager, somebody on the team, and let them know and bring up that specific question to say, hey, there was a yes or no question on your application process, and I take ethics over anything else, and I had to say no, but the way it was framed or the way it was asked might not be interpreted, at least from my perspective, wasn't interpreted correctly. So it's a really, really difficult one to answer. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at job applications, there's so many pieces of it where people just aren't ethical for whatever reason. I mean, I run into it on a weekly basis. As simple as, have you applied to the company? No. Great. Put your resume into the database, and somehow they forgot they applied a week ago, and I put that in quotes. They probably knew, but they were trying to get a second way in there, and that will cut you out. I don't think anybody questions ethics. If they have any sort of question about it, you're out of the picture. And this is a good one, recruiters. A long question here is, how should I rely on a recruiter versus my own network? How to best engage with a recruiter for success in finding a job? How many should I work with? When it's time to move on, how much communication with a recruiter is too much, weekly, monthly? So I'll start with that first part, is how much should I rely on a recruiter versus my own network? Both. Do both. If your network isn't huge in a specific area, obviously you'll have to rely more on a recruiter. And a lot of you have talked to me about this, and recruiters are a bold take, and I'll give it out here. Is I've heard from, not my own experience, but working with a lot of people, that there's not a lot of good ones out there. And so that's why I say, if you have a network, rely on them. If you have a good recruiter, not a great network, puts you in a better spot. If you're not working with a good recruiter and you don't have a good network, you're going to need to find a new one. And the best way to engage with a recruiter for success in finding a job, I think, it's going to be, again, hit or miss. It depends on who you're working with, how well networked they are. Are they working on that job specifically? And there's another question that we'll get into that piggybacks off of this. But if they're working on the job, they have a direct end for you. It's better, obviously better than nothing. It's better than applying, for sure. How many recruiters should I work with? My job, and I think a lot of recruiters may think differently of this, is my job is to help you. If I'm in your shoes, I'd work with 10, I'd work with 20, if they're all good. It's our job is to help you get a job. And if it's not through us, somebody can look at that and say, oh, that sucks. But I mean, at the end of the day, I want people to be happy. I want people to have a job and be happy in that job. And so if it's through somebody else, great. If it's through me, great. Our job is to be a resource to you. If somebody's upset that you're working with another recruiter, I think it's a little odd, to be honest with you. Now, if you're doing it behind their back, different story. When there's no transparency there, I would be more upset at the lack of transparency than the working with the other recruiter part. And then the when is it time to move on? I don't know if that's in reference to sending your resume over and not hearing back and getting ghosted, which of course is pretty common in today's hiring climate, unfortunately. I think if there's, and this may piggyback off of that second question, is how much communication is too much. Um, I think until they owe you, they owe you an answer. If they're telling you they're going to get you an answer and they don't give you one, they owe you one. I don't think there's too much. But when you're looking at weekly, 2 weeks, monthly, if it's just a general job search, I think every few weeks is fine. If you're in a process with a recruiter, weekly. I mean, you deserve an update unless they tell you otherwise, unless they say, hey, we're not going to hear back from the hiring manager for 3 weeks because they're waiting on data. You know that. So there's no need to reach out every week. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if the recruiter is transparent with you and says, hey, here's when the next update should come, because I think every hiring scenario is a little different. Some hiring teams are like, we need to move. We need to move right away. We need feedback. We want to have the role filled within a month. Obviously, more towards the weekly mark is a fair answer. But the thing about jobs and candidates and recruitment and HR is there's so many moving parts and so many variables. I think that's one of the important pieces from our perspective, is to give you a timeline, to give you transparency as much as we have. And then this is a really, really good one, is why do you think things have shifted from heavy communication from a recruiter 5 to 10 years ago to limited communication or virtually none today? And more specifically, when a candidate gets eliminated from a process, well, the candidate getting eliminated from a process is a tough one, because HR thinks less is more right now. Tons of HR back in, I don't know how long ago it was, but 5-10 years ago, we'll call it, lawsuits everywhere from candidates. And so, candidates, in a sense, and I'm not grouping you all as a whole because it's not fair, but essentially shot themselves in the foot. Is they got feedback, and then there was a small select few candidates who, sued companies or filed lawsuits. And so now it's like we shift the whole, the HR shifts the whole way back and says, you know what, we can't give any feedback, or virtually none. But I think there's a way to do that. There's a right and a wrong way. And the hard part is most HR people communicate with me and others over email. So if it's in writing, it makes it a little bit more tough. And I think the second piece of that is just civilization as a whole. We've become so entrenched and so used to technology, right? And there's good and bad of that. I think it can make you more efficient, but we've seen in the recruitment space right now, it's made people incredibly inefficient because they've been implementing technology in areas and practices where it shouldn't be there. And so, you have just overall society saying, they're on their phones 24/7, and that's spewed over into the professional world. And so I think kind of a combination of both, to be honest with you. Is it a commonplace for a recruiter to claim they're working with an organization when in reality they're not? To collect as many resumes as they can and present to a specific company? Yeah, it is, unfortunately, from what I've heard. And as a recruiter, what they're doing is they're trying to get new business. and they're just not being transparent with you. And so I think you can look at it as two different ways. As you know, if they do that to you, well, at least you're looking at the glass half full here. You're a good candidate. You're top tier, because nobody's going to put low caliber talent in front of a company when they're trying to get business. I do it in a way where I'm transparent and I say, hey, look, I'm willing to present you to a company and it's a win-win. I'm doing a free service for you, skipping the line of resumes, putting your, marketing you as much as I can to an organization. And the win for me is I get a new client. I call it, some people have heard of it, the third method. There's two ways to apply and they suck. Number one is you apply online. I think that's the reason why we're here is nobody's hearing back. And number two, you go through your network. And what I've heard is a lot of people are doing that and it's not working as well as it should be. So I think, again, there's a lack of transparency. People are framing it a different way. But in reality, yeah, there are a lot of recruiters, from what I've heard, that are now saying, you know what, I want new business. I'm going to take Joe Schmo, who's a top tier marketing candidate in pharma biotech. I'm going to put him in front and mass market him to a bunch of different companies. So if you're getting a general email from a recruiter as a hiring manager, they could be doing that to you, unfortunately. Silent recruiters. Yes, kind of another piggyback question from earlier is several years ago, I was bombarded with recruiters messaging me on LinkedIn. Now, zero messages. I've moved from our US to Canadian affiliate. Could this be why? The second part, colleagues are not selling my info to recruiters since I'm no longer on US org charts. That I don't think that part's true, but on the bombarded with recruiters to now zero, there's two pieces. The market slowdown. There's not as many open roles, and there's hardly any viable roles. And so, with that being said, I mean, there's just going to be fewer messages for you as a candidate because there's less open roles. I've found that there are about 30% of the roles on LinkedIn that are viable. 70 to 75% are not, and that's the freaky part. And so, if you're applying and never hearing back, that's why the numbers are not in your favor. And what I had done and how I got to those numbers is the last year and a half, I was pitching a bunch of candidates to a lot of different companies. Candidates send me the roles, that third method I was talking about. And I reach out, and I keep track of everything. And over about 200 different roles, where probably 75 to 100 different candidates would send me roles, various roles. Sometimes they'd send me 20, sometimes they'd send me 2 or 3. I just kept track of everything. And in most cases, I would ask the hiring manager, are you planning on going internal? Are you going external? Or is the timing off? Are you going to make an offer in, 2 or 3 days? And kept track of that. And every quarter, I run a report on what's viable and what's not viable. And to me, if they have an internal, that's not viable. If they've posted or filled the role and they just forgot to take it down, that's not viable. If they're going to, if they're going to find, or if they're going to make an offer in 2 or 3 days, yeah, it's a little bit in between. I consider it viable, but just the timing's off. And a lot of companies, we're seeing smaller companies that aren't budgeted to hire in 2023. They're going to hire in February of 2024, and they're going to post it in November, this year. And so I think those pieces, are to me not viable opportunities. And so that's where you have less recruiters reaching out to you because only 30% are viable. AI, yeah, this is a talk. And there's two pieces I have on AI. This question is in specific to just a candidate profile, I believe. And is it valuable for pharma positions right now? I think it depends on the role. If it's a marketing role, probably not so much right now. But what we saw in pharma biotech over history is it was an industry that was far behind. Digital marketing, perfect example. You look at tech companies, as soon as that thing was relevant, I mean, most of them were implementing it. You look at pharma, and now it's just becoming, I wouldn't say now, but in the last couple of years, it's really become a big thing, when in other industries it was massive. And so I think if you're considering it, look into it right now, because it will become a very, very valued piece. I think we had apps with phones, right? And that was what, 10, 15 years ago. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, what are apps? Now we have 100 on our phone. I think it's going to be the same thing with AI, is it will be the new app of society, if you will. And then remote. Are remote opportunities in pharma a thing of the past? They're not, but there's not many of them. I would say probably full remote, not going into the office, less than 5%. Most, and I would say most being 85, 90% or 3 days a week, which you have to move. And that's because of the old school leadership style. Um, and I think old school leadership better wake up because 80%, 87% of millennials want full-time remote. And 35% would leave their job for full-time remote. 82 expressed higher loyalty to a company because they're remote. And so I know everybody's got their opinions and thoughts and good and bad, but I mean, millennials are the number one the, demographic in the workforce, not in pharma yet. Give it 5 years, definitely 10, and they will be. And so when you're dealing with the majority of the workforce, a massive number, 87%, and then loyalty over 80%, I think just numbers don't lie, and you can't argue that. And whether or not it shifts that way, it's going to have to. Are we seeing a tick up in pharma biotech hiring in Q4? And how is AI impacting that? So there's two pieces to that. Yes, we are. I wouldn't say substantial, but we are, which is a good sign. The AI piece is impacting the decisions. It's like the first step to a lot of companies, and I have a lot of people who've called me the last couple of days talking about this. They use some sort of software. I have to find out what software that is because it's not working very well. And the problem is it'll see Venclexta on a resume, and if somebody's in industry, most people know Venclexta is oncology. So hiring manager says, I want oncology profiles. Somebody's been on Venclexta for the last 10 years in sales and marketing and even marketing analytics. And that AI tool is saying, oh, not a fit. I don't see oncology on here. And so that's where a lot of companies are adding technology into try to be more efficient. But in reality, they're losing out on candidates. And they're going to keep that role open for another 2 months because they can't find the right candidate. Venclexta candidate sitting there getting a rejection email saying they're not a fit, and they're like, "What the hell is going on? How am I not a fit?" And so that's how AI is impacting it. It just the initial decision. That's why I think bias here. Recruiters are a necessity. And if we use these kind of tools in the right fashion, we can be incredibly productive. But right now, they're not being used in the right fashion. Timing. The average time to get a new opportunity, and it's hard to say. I mean, it's so many variables, but I think the two biggest variables are the location that you're in and the ability to relocate. Here in South Dakota, you can't relocate. It's going to be hard. There's not a lot of pharma. If you're in Boston and you don't have the ability to relocate, you're in a much better spot. And then the level of the role that you're looking for. And what I'm seeing a lot of right now is now is not the time to be looking to get into a new therapeutic area, an advancement in title. It's really the opportunity to take a lateral in title because there's so much talent out there. That's the unfortunate truth. And so what I mean by that is if there's a director level role that's open, marketing we'll call it, and you've got an associate director of marketing who's been in that role for 4 years. In a normal hiring climate, common logic is it's time to move into that director. But in reality, what's the type of candidate that's at the door is going to be a junior level director, a director that's been a director for 3 or 4 years, and even sometimes a senior director that's relatively new. And so if I'm the company and the hiring manager, I mean, you've got all this talent over here, and that season wise, I'm going to go with them first. And it's unfortunate for that associate director, but that's just the harsh reality of it. And there's two more big questions left, and I'll get to the main ones. Is why is there such an influx in candidates for every role? On average, anywhere from 2 to 800. That's true. How do you cut through the clutter? LinkedIn's made it way too easy to apply. So in return, they just have a bunch of applicants, people who are throwing stuff at the fence, thinking it might stick, and they don't have the proper tools to cut through them. I've seen 500 applicants for a VP of Market Access on oncology. There's not even 500 people in the world that fit that. So here are some of the additional questions Mackenzie's put in front of me that I think are great. Should you eliminate experiences on your resume and LinkedIn that are older than 20 years? In academia, no. In professional pharma, biotech, commercial, yes. I wouldn't have your resume more than 2 pages. So if it takes up more than 2 pages, take it off. And then should we allow for AI to look at resumes during an application process, or is it better to opt out? I'd opt out, but you don't know where it's going on the back end. You don't know if it's going to a human or if they're just putting it into a side pile. You don't know how the AI is trained either, because AI does take training, and so that is a really difficult question. Um, it can hurt you in either way. It can hurt you because the AI is not trained enough to know Van Clexta means oncology. It can hurt you because you don't know where the resume is going to go to. Um, so I think it's a hard question. Yeah, I mean, it can go either way. So there's one favor I have. And if you found this webinar helpful, by the way, I appreciate you all coming. Two things is write some sort of review on LinkedIn and share my name with your network, as many people as you can. If you don't know how to write a LinkedIn review, give me a shout on. You can message me on LinkedIn. I'll walk you through it, and just share my name out there. That's all. So really appreciate you all coming. Hopefully this was helpful. If feedback's good, I'll definitely do some more of these, maybe once a month or so, and we can narrow it down to specific topics. So thank you all for coming.